What's up, everybody? This is Kyle with Simulation Lab here in Brooklyn, New York. Back again with another tutorial using 3D Studio Max and TyFlow. This is going to be my last tutorial of 2019. Had a great year, did a bunch of really weird experimental art and a bunch of commission work and stuff, and it was just been a pretty crazy busy year. Yeah, this will be my last tutorial of this year, and then definitely continue to make more in 2020, as long as some future plans. Kind of been thinking about starting a little like video podcast series in the future. So more news on that to come. But we'll go ahead and jump into this. So this tutorial is going to be on creating like dynamic Boolean objects that Boolean in real time and transfer some particles in between them. So I recently made this video um, and I got a bunch of requests to do tutorials, so watch this. So basically the objects run into each other, and we use a TyBoolean operator or TyBoolean modifier to Boolean the union the objects together, and then where the union creates a void where the particles can transfer from one object to the other. So this video is a little bit more complex. We'll probably focus more on just like take one shape, Boolean it into another, and then maybe into another or something in this video to make it a little bit more simple. Because this one had a bunch of caveats, a bunch of issues. As you can see, it's not perfect. Some of the particles bleed out. You see that? So when they bleed out like that, it's just because for whatever reason, when it collides with the mesh of the whole Boolean mesh, um, like for whatever reason, the collision doesn't calculate some of the collisions correctly and allows some penetration. So I tried increasing the physX substeps a shitload and velocity iterations and stuff like that, and I increased everything I could. And that sort of thing just kind of happens. The only thing I found was to just increase the particle size a little bit, and it seemed to work. But to have really fine particles, like almost like grains, it requires some finesse. So we'll get into that. So let's jump into Max here. I'll just go ahead and minimize that. Okay, first things first is we're gonna set up our units. I'll stick with centimeters for this. Doesn't really matter. And I think what we're gonna do is I'm going to start with a sphere. Maybe I'll make that like 30. And we'll go ahead and zero that out. I'm going to start with a sphere and have it blend into a cube, I think. And we'll make this like, that's pretty small. 60 by 60 by 60, something like that. Zero that out. So, and then the camera will follow these primitive shapes. So that'll like completely blend into the inner side of the cube. And then the particles from inside the sphere will bleed into the cube, and then they'll like fall into the cube. And then what we might do is we might spin them or something. But then after this happens, maybe they blend into another shape, like a pyramid or something. So zero that out. And maybe make that a little bit smaller. Hundred by something like that. I'm not exactly sure what this is gonna do, but if it blends in like that, maybe we'll like scale the box or something. We can even just scale this a little bit. Yeah. I don't know. We'll figure it out. We'll see how that kind of works. But I think I'm just going to have the particles spawn just in this sphere. Kind of spread these out a little bit. And I'll do my camera a little bit later on. But I think for now what we're going to do is, I think first thing first is I'm going to link these together. So when I move one, all of them move. So I can scale and rotate them and do whatever. So I might link this one to this with the link tool there. And I'll link the cube to the prism. So that way if I move the prism, the whole thing moves. If I move just the cube, these two the cube and the sphere move, and the sphere moves independently. So that'll allow me to do is I'll animate one at a time. Let's make it 10 seconds. So let's do maybe 90 frames. We'll take this one, take the sphere, and move it down into the cube. So it's like right perfectly in the center. And then what we could do is maybe scale it a little bit. You know what we might do is, let me like back here. Make a keyframe there, and I just want it to scale just right when it enters the cube, just like that. That should be cool. I'll have that happen a little sooner. Yeah. Okay, and then we'll do the same. So that'll bleed into this one, and then we'll get a keyframe there for the cube. We'll bring this one down, like 180. So give it like 3 seconds per transfer or something. And I might want to slow all of this down in the future, but we'll just see how this works. And then we'll bring down the cube there, and then create a keyframe there, and then here. Scale the whole thing down. So that gives us this effect where the sphere enters the cube, the particles will stay in the cube, and then they'll enter the sphere, and then they'll scale down, or they'll enter the prism and scale down. So that way you won't even see those objects anymore. They'll just be transferring from one to the other, if that makes sense. Okay, so now that we have that set up, I might like do a little bit of, I might play with this a little bit. I think the speed might be a little too fast. Yeah, I could probably stretch these things out a little bit. So let's make this to 120, and we'll make this start at 120. That way it goes all the way down there, 120. And then maybe I'll stretch these out a little bit too. 240. And I think what I might want to do is do a little bit of like a rotation on it. I think that'd be kind of cool. So what I'll do here is I'm going to affect the pivot. Let's put that in the center of the cube. And then from here, maybe like down to here, maybe we'll like rotate it. 45 and 45 or something. So now what we'll do is we'll grab the sphere and modifiers. We'll do TyBoolean. TyBoolean, and I'm going to go ahead and save this real quick. Okay, so with our TyBoolean modifier added, we're going to pick our object. So we'll pick our cube and we'll pick our prism. So now when we scrub through here, and if we turn on like wireframe or something, you can see what's happening. The sphere is Boolean unioning into the cube, so you can no longer see it. And then the same thing happens with our prism. So that should work pretty cool. Yeah. Using the Boolean modifier is a necessary first step to create the voids between the objects, which is great because the TyBoolean modifier like works super dynamically and it just works really well as opposed to the regular max Boolean modifiers. So that's necessary to create the voids between the shapes, which allows like a pocket for the particles to eventually fall through into the next shape. So that was really necessary for doing this kind of thing, where like one object bleeds into the next. You could, in theory, just use the TyMesher and like mesh all the objects together, but what's going to happen is those voids are not created. So once one object gets into the next one, your particles just don't know where to go, so they just like eventually pop out of the top of the previous shape. So it doesn't really work. So TyBoolean is a necessary first step. And then in order to create like an effective mesh on this stuff, what we're going to have to do is we'll turn on our edge faces and we're going to subdivide everything. That'll give us more vertices for the TyMesher to cling onto. Subdivide. And we'll go ahead and decrease this way down. That should be okay for now. We'll see how that works. So you can see we subdivided it, all of the entire mesh. It's now one object. We could still control the individual primitives individually. We could just turn them back on and then continue animating them or whatever. And the original Boolean operator will update dynamically, which is really cool. Okay, now that we have this subdivided, we'll go ahead and create our TyMesher. So bring our TyMesher into the scene here. And this is all necessary to do before you set up any like TyFlow logic. So we'll keep it on blob mesh. We'll pick our Boolean object there. And then probably going to have to increase this to like 2 or something like that. Enable filtering. Turn this off for now. And we can kind of just play with this thing. I'm probably going to want to subdivide this like a little bit more. I'll put this down to like 4. There you go, nice and smooth. Nice and silky smooth. We watched Don't Mess with the Zohan yesterday. If you guys ever seen that Adam Sandler movie, it's pretty good. Morgan was not too enthralled. Okay, so I dropped our absolute radius of the blob mesh down to 2. I think that should work okay. We can like pop this on, and right now we actually don't need to see our the original Boolean object anymore, so we can hide that. And we might want to like increase this like a little bit, just to give us a little bit more smoothness on there. We can always relax that later. And now you can see what's happening. Our TyMesher is working on top of our Boolean, and you can see, if you look closely, you can kind of see that there's a void there, right? And that's the void that we want. So we draw this back a little bit. You can kind of tell in the wireframe preview here that there's a void being created between the sphere and the cube, right? So that's what we want. So that's going to allow us a little bit of a pocket, like a window, for the particles that are going to be inside this sphere to like bleed into the next primitive, into the cube, right? So we'll turn that off. So that should be good for now. Later on, we can adjust our the resolution settings of our mesh, the radius of our blob mesh and stuff, and get it nice and smooth and clean. And on top of this, you could always put on a relax modifier or something, but we'll do that later once we finish our TyFlow logic. So we're going to be using this TyMesh as a collider, which isn't the most efficient way of doing this in terms of um, like in terms of using it as a collider. It takes a long time to calculate, but it'll work. And the more vertices, the better when it comes to like really dynamic simulations, like grains and particles and stuff like that, interacting with mesh like this. So first thing first is we're going to turn back on all of our primitives, and we have to make a duplicate of them. So I'm going to go ahead and clone this as a copy, and then I'm going to put these on a new layer called emitters. Well, I guess we only need the sphere because I'm not emitting. In this previous video, I emitted particles inside of each one of these primitives. And for this one, I don't think we really need to do that. I think I might just do... Actually, you know what? Yeah, we'll do it. We'll do it that way. Yeah, that'll be cool. Okay, so now that I have the emitters, I'm going to go ahead and hide my previous objects there. We don't need any of that. I'm going to remove the subdivide and the Boolean, so I only have my three primitives. And what I'm going to do is I need to scale these locally, and I'm going to turn back on this guy just for now, and I'll turn on wireframe just so we can see what's happening. And I'm just going to scale these inward a little bit, and obviously they messed up the positioning of them, but that's fine. We can remove them. Okay. All this is doing is we don't even need this to be animated, but this is just going to allow us to. It's just going to give us something to populate our particles onto. So we can even remove all of the animation keyframes off of all of these. We don't need them. Cool. Actually, we might keep them on the sphere. I'm sorry. Go ahead and just keep them. We'll keep them on the sphere. So at least the sphere is animated. Okay. Now that we have these set up, that's going to be part of our sim. So we'll go ahead and hide our Boolean object. We just have these three emitters, and then that's what we're going to use to create our the little particles inside of these primitives. So first things first is I'm going to give this a transparent material so we can see through the mesh. And for this one, I'm probably going to use V-Ray or F-Storm. I'm not really sure yet. Let's set this up real quick. Convert the scene. We just need to convert all materials, and I'll go ahead and adjust all the render settings later. 12 light samples, max depth to 24, noise threshold at 001, and we'll play with that later. All I wanted to do is to convert all the materials. So now we have F-Store materials, and I'm just going to make a simple glass material real quick, and turn that to black. Diffuse is black, reflection is somewhere right there. Doesn't really matter for right now. We'll do 0.9 for glossiness, and for refraction we'll go all the way to white. and we'll play with the material a little bit more later on. But for now, that allows us to see the mesh. A little bit more. There you go. Okay. So now we can see our mesh. We can see our little emitters inside. And all I really wanted to do there was to make sure that the emitters are inside the voids of the mesh there. So click back on our sphere. Move that down a little bit. Okay, good. And if we scrub our timeline, our sphere emitter follows the inside of that mesh decently. We might want to drag that down a little bit more. Cool. And this is all procedural, so we can go back and adjust things when we need to. Yeah, okay, so now we have that set up. We'll go ahead and create our TyFlow object in our scene there. Drag this off to the side so we can see what's happening. I'll pop up my window. Okay. Cool. So what we want to do is we want to birth some voxels, and we're just gonna focus on the sphere just for now, and maybe we'll add the other ones like a little bit later on. I don't really think I want to put anything in the prism. So maybe I'll just like hide the prism for now. So maybe it'll just be like the sphere pushes particles into the cube, and then the cube and the sphere particles are mixed together, and they dump them into the prism. Yeah, something like that. So we'll go ahead and I'm going to adjust this a little bit more. Oh, because they're linked. That's why they moved. I'm stupid. Anyway. Whatever. Okay, so we'll go ahead and birth voxels onto our sphere. So we'll go ahead and, with our sphere selected, sphere emitter, I'll add that to the voxels. And we can go ahead and display geometry. And for this, I'm going to do a shape, and we'll do a 3D mid-res geosphere. Yeah, let's see how that works. And I'll go ahead and hide our emitter. So that looks pretty good. I think what we might want to do is like decrease this a little bit. We'll keep it at 5 centimeters for right now, just to see how that works. But yeah, so that's pretty much it for that. And then obviously we want them to collide with the interfaces of the mesh, the TyMesher. So for that, we're going to toss in a physX shape operator, and then collision. And then we're going to set the collision, instead of convex, we're going to set that to mesh. And then we're going to pick our TyMesher object. So it's going to freak out. This is going to be a bit of a lengthy process to process this, but we'll check this out. So now that we have this set up, what we'll do is go ahead and test it. And it takes a little while to process. It's got to basically process each frame. So you could tell that it's working. So it's colliding with the interface of the TyMesher right there. So that's cool. So I'm gonna process this out a little bit so we can see it bleed into the next cube, and I'll pause the video. Okay. So now that it's processed out a little bit, we can scrub the timeline. We can see what's happening. So this is looking great so far. So we have is the sphere comes down, and then on contact, the TyBoolean is working, and it's driving our TyMesher. And then as soon as that void, that little pocket opens up, the particles from the sphere start to fall into the cube, which works great. So they get dumped in there. Awesome. And then the sphere bleeds in, and then it doesn't affect the particles any longer because it becomes one mesh. So that's how we set it up. So now what we'll do is let's grab this back, and we'll set up the particles inside our cube, right? So now before we do that, I'm going to set up a quick little material, multi-sub-object material, to color the particles. So I'll just do like particle, if I can type, oh my god, colors. I'll change this to a multi-sub object. We'll discard the old one. And for this, we're only going to use 3. And I'm using FStorm. Regardless of what rendering engine you're using, multi-sub object material will be available. So this is the same process. All I'm really doing is doing very basic colors. So I might just do like a blue. We'll add a little bit of like reflectivity. We'll adjust all this stuff later. Let's do a blue. I'll do like we'll copy it down here, and we'll do like a purple, pink, magenta kind of color, and like a red. Or maybe we'll do like a white or something. Sure. I used this color palette before, so I might change that later, but it doesn't really matter. It's just to give us a representation of what the particles are doing. So now that we have this multi-sub-object material set up, we'll go ahead and apply it to for first event. So we can name this first event sphere. So that'll be our number 1 event. Toss in a material ID operator, and we'll keep that as static, and we'll set it, and that'll just be set to 1. So now if we apply our material to our TyFlow object, multi-sub object material, apply that, it's blue, because blue corresponds to slot 1. Okay, so now that we have that set up, we'll go ahead and turn off the sphere flow here, and we'll copy and paste it. And then I'm going to rename this cube, and then we'll remove our sphere from our voxel source, and we'll go ahead and in our emitters, let's choose our box, and with that selected, we'll go ahead and add selected. Add selected, there you go. And then for material, we'll set this to 2. So now if we'll turn our box emitter off, we'll turn on our sphere, and then we'll turn on our cube. Cool. So now we have particles inside our cube and our sphere. So now that we have that done, what we'll do is we'll test this out and see how it works. So I'll pause the video and process it out. Okay, so we process it out, and let's scrub through it. And you can see the particles inside the cube are static, and the ones inside the sphere bleed into them, and you get a good little ice cream sandwich effect going on there, which is pretty cool. So that's cool. So once they start moving, they're not going to really, unless I like twist the sphere, or unless I rotate it a lot or something, they're not really going to mix together, which that's fine. I think it's cool to have a little bit of separation. Also, what you could do is you can use an object bind or a physX bind to bind the particles together if you want them to be like a little sticky or something. For this, we're just going to leave them as like just physical little objects that like knock into each other, and there's a little bit of a bounce, and it just kind of, you know. But just to know that that's an option. So if we process this all the way out, these particles are going to bleed into the prism, and then they're going to fall into the prism. And then, in theory, that should work. But before we do that, I'm going to add a little bit of particles to the prism. So that's just the exact same process as we did before. I'm going to go ahead and shrink this up a little bit. We're not going to need our operators. This is basically the entire flow. I'll turn these off. I'll grab our cube, paste that. I'm going to rename this prism and remove this. And then in our emitters, with our pyramid emitter selected there, add that. And then in the material ID, I'm going to set that to 3. So now I might have to adjust it. There might be too many particles in the prism. Because I only want like a little bit. Yeah, I mean, there's just like way too many. So I think it might like completely fill up. If, for instance, if the one of the objects is completely full with particles, the simulation gets a little crazy. It might bug out. There might be particles that try to pop out of the mesh, and we don't really want that to happen. So what I might do is I might just turn this off. I'll turn on my pyramid, and I have that selected. Okay, so instead of scaling it, I'm just going to decrease the overall like width. I'll do something like 80 by 80 by 65, something like that should be okay. Let me raise that up a little bit. And then bring our other emitters down a little bit there. Cool. And that should be okay. So we'll go ahead and turn off our emitters. And then we'll turn on our prism just to check it. Yeah, that should be enough particles. I don't want too many. Okay. Awesome. So now that we have that set up, I'm going to, I might adjust the colors a little bit. Kind of boring. But we could do that later. So for now, I'm just going to put this to the side, and then I'll process the whole thing out, and we'll check it out. And then after we process it out, then we're going to bake the particles into a TyCache object, and then we'll just disable our flow, and then we can start setting up our cameras and stuff. Okay, I got a little helper with me. This is Buzz. He's our dog. We just gave him a haircut, and he hates it. Okay, don't eat the microphone. All right. Oh boy. Okay. You go terrorize mom when she's working out. Okay. So we had a bit of an issue with like now that you could see the cube is pretty full of particles. So as they fall, that's okay. I mean they kind of start to bleed out a little bit, which is fine. We'll just increase the substeps. We didn't increase them at all. So once we increase the substeps, it'll fix that a little bit. You can tell it's working the way we want, but as soon as they enter, they like pour into the prism, and there's just a lot. There's just a lot of particles, right? So I think we probably are going to have to decrease our particle count a little bit, or maybe decrease the particle count and increase the substeps. I mean, it is working okay, so we might just like leave it like that. But I'm going to try to increase the substeps a little bit and see if we can get rid of some of that particles bleeding through the mesh there. So that's what we're working with. Okay, so I increased the simulation substeps into the physics solver to be about 20. So it was 6 originally. I think the default is 6. So I increased that to 20 and worked beautifully. So now I don't have any weird particles like penetrating through the mesh, and it looks really super nice and clean. So we drag, if we scrub all the way back, you can see our sphere pours into our cube there. And then cube starts to rotate, pours into the prism, and then the cube and the prism become one. So I'd say that's pretty cool. That's pretty successful. So now what we'll do is, I think I'm only going to want this to like play out to like 270 frames or something. So what I'm going to do now is in my TyFlow operator, bring that back over here, and go to export particles, and I'm going to just set this to be like 270 as a Ty cache, and we'll browse and put this somewhere. DC doot, put that in there, and then I'm just going to generate particles. Cool. Now we have that. I'm going to disable the flow. And sometimes this happens where it doesn't read it right away. What you're going to want to do is just grab it, and then you just have to like point to the sequence. That usually should bring it up. Oh, right. I was scrubbed beyond the bounds of the animation. So, okay. So now that we have that set up, we'll go ahead and we can adjust our materials. So that doesn't have to process anymore because that's baked, it's static. So it's not really simmed anymore. So we can adjust our materials. Maybe it's something, instead of white, maybe I'll do like, should be kind of cool. Okay. And then, so from here, we'll start to animate our camera. So I think do this from the front view. Actually, I'll do it like this. Grab our target. I'm going to zero that out. Get our camera. I'll zero that x-axis out, and then I'll just kind of adjust this here. And then I'm going to set this viewport to be our camera view, default shading, and I'm going to turn on safe frames. So kind of like bring that up there, and then I'm going to raise this up. Okay, and with our camera and target selected, we can see it in the viewport. We got a close-up of the sphere. So I'm going to, what I'm probably going to do is I might animate this like this, like the first few frames, maybe like to frame 10 or something. It'll like zoom down into the sphere, something like that. So I want to make it a loop. So zooms down to the sphere starts falling. Okay, so as this sphere starts falling, we're going to adjust our camera accordingly. So maybe like we'll put it down to like 80 and adjust this. So that should give us like a pretty cool looking effect. So I want it to be out of the frame the sphere pops up. We're like basically falling with the sphere. Maybe at like 120. Focus right up into the cube there. Okay. And the cube starts falling and it starts turning. Then maybe around 200 or so. Drag this down again. And then we want to show the cube bleeding into the prism. And then I might animate the camera itself move back a little bit. So I might drop that down a little bit more. That. Raise it up a little bit more. And we can go ahead and we could animate the movement of the camera. I think that'd be cool if you saw like more of an oblique angle like that. And I'll grab the target and move that down a little bit too. Kind of center up the composition a little bit. I'd say it's pretty good. Cool. So that's what we got so far. I might, like maybe about here, grab both the target and the camera, make a new keyframe and move that up a little bit. I could use curves. I could just use like a linear curve for this, but I kind of want it to be a little bit more like fluid and kind of jump. I kind of want it to like jump around like a little bit. So hopefully this is starting to make sense here. Basically, the idea is there's primitive objects that bleed into one another, and they like sort of like coalesce the little particles, and they kind of mix around a little bit, and then they collide and morph into one another, and we're left with like a layer cake of particles, right? So for now, I think we're pretty much almost done. All I'm gonna do here is set up a quick plane, do a little bit of tweaking the render settings, and then we'll be good to launch this one. So like that, create a plane, hit a poly, and if you've seen my past tutorials, I typically do like a quick little render setup just to kind of like tie the knot and finish it up. Oops, if I was paying attention. Okay. So chamfer this, I'm just making a background plane, 40 segments. Give that a little bit of an angle there. Should be fine. Okay, so for the background plane, probably make this a gray or a white or something. Or maybe I'll use a color that I didn't use. Let's just make it gray for now. Okay. Okay, so we'll set up a disk light here. I'm going to bring that up. That's probably way too big. All right. Something like that. That'll be a primary light. Yep. And then our secondary light will be something like this. Just like way back here. This is how I typically kind of do things. Just kind of quick and dirty for this at least. And then we'll create another light as our backdrop light here. I'll angle that to our plane. Bring that guy up. Oops. Cool. And then we'll set that one to be, oh boy. Okay, so we gotta raise that up a little bit. Something like that. And we gotta grab our top edge here and raise it way up. Okay. Okay, so now we'll adjust some of the settings of these lights. Maybe make this like 2, make our secondary light like 3 or something, and we'll make our primary light power of 9 or something. Okay, and then with that, okay, yeah, one last thing I want to do is add a environment. So we'll, oops, create a FStorm, pop in an HDRI map. Yeah, that'll work. Set the spherical environment. I'm going to set my gamma to 2, something like that. And I'll set my multiplier to like 2. And then that should be okay. And then we can try to render it out and see what we got. Okay, so we have to adjust a couple things. So in our TyCache operator, TyCache object, sorry, grab that, and then in render, we're going to have to do meshes instead of V-Ray instances because we're not using V-Ray. So now if we reload that, there you go, we see our particles. Cool. So now what we could do to kind of smooth out our TyMesh a little bit, I could add I guess I could do like a filter. I can increase the filter width a little bit. I might just make it lumpy. Yeah. Might do like a relax. Increase that to 1. Give it a couple iterations. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. Okay. And then what we could probably do as well is push it a little bit. Push. And then we could push it in like a negative value. Maybe make it a little bit skinnier. There you go. We could add like a little bit of aberration to the glass. Simplest way to do that is dispersion, like 0.1. It's a little bit of like chromatic aberration to the glass, which I like that. Looks pretty cool. I'm not totally convinced I really like the background, that color, but let's just check something. Okay, let's see what's happening here. I gotta lower this down a little bit because it's cutting through the TyMesh. There, so I'm gonna put it about there. There we go. So now you can see the corners. Might lower that a little bit more. I don't know if I want that shadow. Creates a pretty heavy shadow at the bottom there, so maybe I do want it to cut into the bottom of the mesh a little bit. I might do something like that. Yeah, that's better. I don't know, for now. Alright, cool. Part of me just wants to make all of these like little metallic spheres. I think that'd be kind of cool. So I think I might do like, let's just try something. Let's do that, and then maybe this one will make them gold. Or like bronze. And then this one will make it like rose gold or something. And I could light the scene directly from the HDRI. I do like having a little bit of control and using my own scene lights. Kind of adds these like little flares of light that reflect off the inner faces of that stuff. So I kind of like that. So I'm probably going to keep that. I'm going to go ahead and tweak the materials a little bit more. I'm not totally satisfied with like the way this is all looking, but I'm going to continue doing that. Alright guys, I adjusted a few colors and stuff, and I got like these different color beads going on here, and I kind of like that. So yeah, we'll conclude the tutorial. I hope you guys found this to be helpful or interesting. Just another idea is something that you can do with the TyBoolean and TyMesher operators. It's a little similar to that bubble tutorial, the blowing bubbles through the wand. That tutorial that I did, we used a similar method using the TyBoolean operator. But this one was cool because we're able to have physics objects interact with the mesh and have the mesh be part of the simulation. So yeah, if you guys liked it, please smash the like button and subscribe. We'll be doing some more tutorials in 2020, and I might explore the possibility of doing more of like a talk show kind of thing, where I'll review some really cool digital art, some other digital content out there. So pretty excited for that, and I might be upgrading some of my camera gear and some better to make some better quality videos. So anyway, let me know what you guys thought of this in the comments below, and look forward to making some cool tutorials and stuff like that in 2020. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching.